Oh God, this is so exciting. This is so exciting. So the person who bought this in 1623 opens this page. This is the first time they've ever been able to read these words.
Well, 7 years after Shakespeare's death, two of his fellow actors and friends decided to create a memorial for him, and they collected together all the plays that Shakespeare had written in his lifetime. There were 36 in the volume. And we call this the First Folio because that's the format of the book. It's the grandest format for English books, usually used for Bibles and volumes of sermons, but here for the first time used for plays.
A tempestuous noise of thunder and lightning heard. It's a great start.
The 400th anniversary of the First Folio Shakespeare has been coming at us for the last few years, and as book dealers, fully aware of this. And so for the last few years, I've been thinking of how we could do something to celebrate this, and could we actually get a First Folio for sale? So I know of one or two copies in private hands that might exist. To my surprise, actually managed to get all four of the Shakespeare folios of the 17th century and the other collected edition of works, which is his poems. And that really makes us having all five of the collected works of Shakespeare from the 17th century. First Folio Shakespeare is the number one book to have in any library. If you speak to any person about a layman almost of, what does the British Library have, or the Bodleian, and they'll go, oh, that's where you get a First Folio Shakespeare. You can go there, you'll see it. It's the number one book on display. It's the birth of the English language.
The First Folio is what we've got, and the means by which Shakespeare has been preserved. That's what's really important about it. We can't actually know what Shakespeare was like before this book, and that just makes it more and more vital to us that we have it. Because without the First Folio and then the subsequent ones which have secured that legacy, we just would not have a Shakespeare.
We are such stuff as dreams are made of, and our little life is rounded with a sleep.
The First Folio, as we now call it, is the apex of English books. It's the foundation. It's written in recognisably modern language. I mean, people sometimes think of Geoffrey Chaucer as the father of English literature, but he writes in Middle English. Few of us can understand it. We can all understand Shakespeare.
The first collected edition, which was put together, comes out in 1623, as we know. It was successful, and so successful that actually within 9 years, which is a very short time in book publishing history at that point, they actually published a second edition, and it was more or less a straight copy of the first edition. The fact that they then felt the need in 1663 to continue this and to make it better, and the third edition actually is a bit grander. What makes it rare, of course, is 3 years later was the Great Fire of London, and so most copies were destroyed, making that the rarest of all the Shakespeare folios from the 17th century. And then finally, at the end of the century, 1685, you get the fourth. And the fourth, although it's last, arguably as a bit of book production, is the best. It's the tallest, it's the grandest, it's the raw paper, it's a beautiful bit of book production. And you see the evolution of how Shakespeare's considered in the 17th century. The poems, by contrast, is this beautiful little book, very suitable for a little book of poetry.
The question of how the folio came into being in 1623 is actually really mysterious. Why was it that they decided this was the thing to do, and how did they go about it? There's a lot of conjecture about that. What we do know is half these plays, 18, have already been printed as individual plays. But perhaps the bigger job is to get access to the working play scripts for all those plays which have not yet been published. So they're plays Julius Caesar, Macbeth, Twelfth Night, The Tempest. In fact, many of Shakespeare's, the plays from the second half of Shakespeare's career.
The copy we have here for sale, 1623 as we know, is the nicest example of the Shakespeare's plays that I have seen come to market in my near 30 years in bookselling. All Shakespeare folios of the first edition have some sort of problems. Supplied leaves, missing leaves, leaves supplied from other copies, later bindings. What we have here is a copy in an early English binding and all of Shakespeare's plays complete. And when you go through it, it's fresh, it's unsophisticated. Actually, it's a refined copy, and given 400-year age, it's extraordinary.
What really appeals to me about these books is they are all unique. We tend to think of the printing press churning out identical copies. Firstly, the printing press in the Shakespearean period did not churn out identical copies. They did a sort of running correction as they went, which meant that all the sheets were in a combination, all the printed sheets were in a combination of corrected and uncorrected, and then they were bound up in different combinations. But more importantly for me, they've had these lives since they were printed. You can see annotations, you can see little corrections, you can see marks from tobacco or candle wax, or one of my favourites is the foot of a wine glass, or a little set of cat's paws or something like that. You know, these are books which have been parts of people's lives, and they show that. It's going to be boring for you guys, because I'm just going to turn every single page. Now look at this. This is the kind of thing that's fantastic. So that's a print. That's print, isn't it? That's a print.
Yeah, that's a thumb.
That's a thumb.
Yeah.
I'm always surprised they don't do more of that when the paper is damp in the print shop.
Yeah.
They must have been. I mean, I know what I'm like when I change the printer cartridge. I mean,
Yes,
so there's just that mark of somebody in the print shop.
it'd be nice to think it was Isaac Jaggard's thumbprint. So there would be one publisher for the First Folio, and that's Edward Blunt, and he used a print shop run by William Jaggard, who was ailing by this time, so his son Isaac Jaggard must have done most of the printing. But it was set up by various compositors who each did part of the book over 2 years, so there were other works going through the press at the same time. So we know a little about some of these compositors. It's possible to get some flavour of their identity from the way they set the type up, which is interesting. One of them seems to have been an apprentice who was apprenticed quite late on in the process, and his work is more heavily corrected than others. But you see things like spelling. They weren't consistent about spelling. So each compositor had their own idiosyncratic spellings. And that means that no two copies of the First Folio are exactly identical, because these changes were made as the book was going through the press.
So this is a book which I think is a collaboration between the theatre, represented by these two actors, John Hemming and Henry Condell. We know that they're sort of friends, long-term colleagues of Shakespeare. They're mentioned in his will in 1616. And they must have been the kind of theatre end of this. And then we've got on our title page Isaac Jaggard and Ed Blunt. So Isaac Jaggard is just taking over the business from his father William, who in fact dies just weeks before this book comes out. And Edward Blunt is often thought to be the kind of brains behind it and the investment behind the whole thing. And so here we've got Hemming and Condell writing to the great variety of readers. What I love about this letter is you feel as if it starts with almost what's become a cliche about Shakespeare, that everybody loves him, from the most able to him that can but spell. There you are numbered. But then it really quickly goes into a very, very economic version of this. The fate of all books depends on your capacities, not of your heads alone, but of your purses. You will stand for your privileges, we know. Read and censure. Do so, but buy it first. Saying, don't really care if you don't like it, so long as you've bought it. Whatever you do, buy. And I've been really, really interested in this, the sort of economics of this book.
It's a strong sales pitch.
It's a very, very strong sales pitch.
Given the complexity of putting this together, I mean, how long do they take to actually print this whole folio?
Well, they take months and months and months, so that we see an advert for this book in an English language list, which goes to the Frankfurt Book Fair. Who knew the Frankfurt Book Fair was happening in 1622? But we don't get this book until November 1623. I don't think they're working on it constantly, because what we do see is that the print shop, Jaggard, has quite a lot of ordinary printing jobs. He does proclamations and advertising bills and that kind of thing. So he has some sort of daily work that comes through. And then we can see there's a great big book that they're doing called The Description of Leicestershire. I don't know why that makes me laugh, because nothing intrinsically funny about Leicestershire. But it's a great reminder that this was not their priority. And we can see them putting this work aside and concentrating on other books. And I think that must be because those authors were alive and coming to the print shop and saying, "Where's my book?"
Here I am. The king does offer him Catherine. Once more unto the bridge, dear friends. Once more.
It's incredible to think what things would be like without this book. I mean, we always say we would have lost 18 plays. That's pretty clear that we would. Two Gentlemen of Verona that we're looking at now would be one of those. It may be that they've sort of loaded it up with unprinted plays at the beginning. That might have been one way to sell this volume as being all new, because half of it has been printed before. But I think as well as those 18, like Two Gentlemen, Macbeth, Twelfth Night, Tempest, all those plays, I actually think we wouldn't really care about the others that we've got. They would be much more distributed. So we wouldn't have Shakespeare. We'd have some plays by Shakespeare.
The excitement of opening a First Folio and reading it is to see all these famous words put into print together for the first time. To be or not to be, there's a special thrill in seeing it on the page. The opening of Macbeth with the three witches. When shall we three meet again? The great entrances of all the major characters, Othello with his "put up your bright swords." You know, these moments there on the page have a resonance. It's as if we're reliving every Shakespeare we've ever seen.
This 17th century English author put into print, in a small print shop near the Barbican in London, has become an absolutely global icon.
Oh, you want the First Folio? I mean, it's where it all begins.